Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host, Bryan. We're going to finish up today with a special selection, which is where one of you tell me exactly what it is I need to check out. Today's special selection comes at us from Lewis. Joanna Newsom, Divers. The video is a nice visual accompaniment, but not necessary. I just watched your analysis on her song Only Skin, and it sends me right back to her music. Modern neoclassical Baroque pop at its finest. So, let's dive into this. We are returning to Joanna Newsom with the track Divers. The main melody, the main piano motif is about diving and rising.
The diver is my love, and I am his. I am not deceived. Who takes one breath above for every hour below the sea? Who gave to me a jewel worth twice this woman's life?
I'm still trying to get a read on the emotion here.
Then laying at low tide to see her true love phosphoresce, and in an infinite regret, tell me why is the pain of birth lighter born than the pain of death? I ain't saying that I loved you first, but I loved you best. I know we must ignite each by the rules that bind us here. The divers and the sailors and the women on the pier. But how do you choose your form? How do
I love that.
you choose your name? How do you choose
Yeah,
your
that counterpoint
heart?
between our piano and harp, I think.
How do you choose the time you must exhale and kick and rise? And in an infinite capsize, like a boat tearing down the coast, double hulls, bearing double masts. I don't know if you loved me most, but you loved me last.
Yeah, like, that's the second time we've heard that chorus, and there's not much resolution to it. It alludes to it and then doesn't. Yeah, the layering here is so good. There's a tension building up. And once again, we have this inversion Some instruments descend, some instruments ascend. It's interesting how often there's a rhythmic lead with very minimal foundational work around it.
Diver's wife. See how the infinite divides, and the divers are not to blame for the rift spanning distant shores. You don't know my name, but I know yours.
And ending the song with that resolution, like we were one note away, 2 notes tops. We were definitely pointed in the right direction to resolve that, and then just didn't. Yeah, an interesting song. I'm definitely have a trouble getting a strong read on it. Plus the fact that it's incredibly dense. This is definitely a song you could listen to 4, 5, 6, 10 times and still hear something new. But I'm going to do my best to break down what I heard, what I remember, and try to tie it all up and explain what's going on here. So I think the most important thing is the moving lines and how they change. This is really interesting. The first half of the track deals a lot with descending and ascending patterns. We saw it right there at the beginning, our very first introduction to the song, our very first instrument, our very first ostinato is a descending line into a rising line in this pattern of rising and falling. We hear this continuously throughout the album. Throughout the track. There's parts where instruments do a descending line and return to the top and descend again and return to the top rather than a flow. It's this stepwise thing where we descend and then just jump right back to the top. We also have the opposite of that, and frequently we heard them together where one instrument would rise and one would fall, and we would kind of have this spiraling element because the song felt like it was simultaneously descending infinitely while also ascending infinitely, and it creates this feeling of not knowing one's place not knowing where you stand. Is the world spinning or standing still? Are we rising into the air or are we falling out of it? You never quite know. You just see that your atmosphere is rapidly moving. And this would be what I would say is the second stage of this, where before we had singular lines, now we have a duality. And by the end of the track, I'd say probably in the last quarter of it, the last minute or two, we kind of got away from these ideas entirely and instead shifted to what I want to call the twinkle phase, which is primarily because we would hear a series of notes rather than in an ascending or descending pattern. It would be sort of bouncing around a key note, a very centered note, and kind of twinkling around it. It was frequently played on the harp and some sort of bells, maybe a xylophone or a glockenspiel, something like that. Um, and so it had a brightness to the timbre already, and the fact that it was a series of eighth notes that just kind of bounced around the center area, especially when we had multiple of these lines going off at the same time, it was like a glittering or shimmering effect. This completely replaced our moving ideas. And it frequently utilized the same instruments that used to do those rising and falling ideas as well. So it was almost as if they transformed from this constant movement to finding a center to revolve around, which is very neat. Um, Something else I want to touch on is counterpoint. And this was, oh no, this was everywhere. I apologize, but something was about to fall and I caught it, and then it really started to fall, and I thought I was gonna have to pause the video to address that. um, Counterpoint. Well, it's not even just counterpoint. It is. I just want to call it multiple melodic ideas, because there are some quasi hocketed sections. There's definitely counterpoint. There's I think at one point I heard something canon like. I'm not going to say it was long enough to really call it a canon, but we did have this passing off of an idea. Um, and it's just so many ways of giving the same, well, no, of utilizing multiple instruments for a lead melody, right? Sometimes they'll do things completely different. That's our counterpoint. Sometimes they'll do things similar, in which case they're staggered. There's our canon. Um, and what was the other one I said? Counterpoint, canon. Oh, and Hocket, which is where they play the same thing but alternate what notes they play. So maybe one instrument plays two notes, another instrument plays three notes, and someone else plays one note, and then goes back to the first one. They get to play two more notes. Um, and so we saw a variety of these ways to give the spotlight to multiple voices at the same time. And it's a wonder to listen to. It is just beautiful every time it happens. And I think this is part of what kind of confuses me is this beauty. We're going to go a little bit into the theme here. Um, there is no resolution in this track, but it's not tense. It's sort of neutral throughout a lot of it. I think that's why I'm having a difficult time parsing the emotional value. Is that there are moments of tension, but we don't really get release from them, but they're also not present. They just sort of go away sometimes, and it's not overly happy. It's not overly melancholic. It's not really abrasive or angsty at all. There's no anger side to it. I'd almost say that the best thing is some sort of wistfulness, but even that feels a bit off when you look at, especially at our ending, our final 2 minutes or so, which is kind of bright and glittery. It's positive ish. The notes still don't really allude to an overly positive outlook, but they are kind of bright. They're the brightest thing that we hear throughout the song. At best, I can look at our lines, the ostinatos that we move through, the licks that we have, and look at what they're doing. We have descending and ascending ideas, which gives us a bit of a flow. I don't really read anything into that, but eventually it becomes a whirlwind of having both the ups and the downs simultaneously and not really knowing what is up or down, not knowing where the ground is or where you should plant your feet. There's confusion in the middle of the song for sure, but I don't know what kind of confusion because the harmonic emotion is very muted. And we come out of this with what I think sounds kind of twinkly and bright and optimistic timbre wise. But again, harmonically, it's kind of muted, and we end without resolution. So there is a negative aspect to that, or some sort of reluctance, or this isn't the end. It could symbolize that there's more to this. Ending the song without resolution could mean a lot of things, but usually that's kind of dictated by what is happening elsewhere. What is the overall themes of the song? Is it cyclical? That could mean that the cycle isn't going to end. Is it a dreary song? Well, that means that they're still kind of, they're not happy at the end. We haven't resolved the issue. Like it could mean a lot of things, and I just don't know what to read of it. This could be about thinking you have a place, getting thrown into turmoil, and then finding a center, finding an element that you can center yourself around, the twinkling part, and that would indicate a type of resolution. We thought we knew what was going on, then we really got lost, and then we found a true place in life, in a social circle, in whatever. You find your place, and the ending should showcase that with a resolution, and it doesn't. So it could be that this is implied that where she thinks she is now is still not where she needs to be, right? There might still be another layer of obfuscation to whatever she's trying to fit into, whether it's trying to find out who she is or who she is in relationship to someone else, or trying to figure out what emotions she has. Like, it's I feel like the whole song is behind a mask. And the more I try to figure it out, the more confused I am because there's so many possible red herrings in the emotional landscape of this track. And I find that to be really interesting because a lot of music that we listen to, even stuff that we've listened to from her in the past, a lot of music just wears its emotion on its sleeve, right? Especially when we're looking at tracks that are thematically, musically, and lyrically in synergy with each other, right? Where the themes of the music line up with the emotions of the themes of the lyrics line up with the emotions of the music. When they don't, we just kind of come to the conclusion they were created separately, right? The band made some music, the vocalist got some lyrics, they found a way to rhythmically fit the lyrics in, and you have a song. That's what happens with a lot of music. But then there's the music where everything just kind of really slots together, and you're like, this is just a perfect way of exploring this topic sonically and linguistically. And that's something I've picked up a lot with Joanna's music, is that she tends to write music that showcases the themes of her lyrics. And it's typically pretty easy to figure out. There's complexity in the note to note writing, the techniques that are utilized, but the emotional resonance is usually fairly clear. It almost feels like this is purposefully driven to be obscure, to be difficult to read, which it's an interesting take. I've only heard like 2 or 3 tracks from her, so I can't really say that this is different from her normal stuff. Maybe I've only been given her highly cohesive tracks, but this feels very different from stuff that I've heard from her on a sonic level. Compositionally, this is exactly what I expect from her. Um, the last thing I want to talk about is dynamics, which kind of pulls over from what we were just talking about. The song utilizes dynamics in quite a lot of ways. First of all, it's just volume. The song does start kind of quiet. It ends up reaching a floor that would dictate what the rest of the song would be judged against, volume wise. And we do hit a peak. My mixer had about a 7 decibel shift between our lowest and highest point. It's not a big use of volume dynamics, but it is something. What I think is more interesting though is dynamics of individual instruments. Primarily, I think most of it is production wise. There's some moments in here once we get out of the beginning, which starts out, well, we can even look at layers as dynamics, where we start off with just one instrument and then eventually a couple with her vocals. And by the end of it, there are a ton of instruments. There's so many moving lines in our final 3 or 4 minutes of the track, the back half of it, that the layers have exponentially grown, which increase the density, the complexity, even the volume in some cases. Um, so we have that type of dynamic, but still on an individual level, some instruments are louder than others. Not everything moves at the same pace, and I think a lot of that is just going to be balancing on the production side, right? How do we get all these voices together where they're not stepping on each other's toes? It's not difficult to listen to, but there are a lot of things going off at the same time. But there is one type of dynamic that I think is really interesting. The individual accented and volume based dynamics of Joanna's vocals. There are plenty of moments in here where she seems to utilize a flow, not necessarily rhythmically, but what syllables to accent, when to be louder, when to be softer, that feel odd. It's a very interesting flow to her vocals that is not something I remember commenting on too often in the past. Again, it lends itself to this obscurity where things don't seem to be about what they should be about, where everything seems to be hiding behind this other element. And her emotions, I do feel, are obscured a bit by her delivery. I think it's really interesting, especially in the first half. She's pretty easy to follow. The way that she delivers her vocals are pretty much what I would expect. But the latter half, she begins to enter into a very different style. Like I said, her volume shifts at odd times. She accents interesting syllables. It's almost as if she isn't, like, it's alluding to an idea of discomfort, of uh, stilted delivery. You know, somebody who's not a good actor, but they try to act. Maybe they're trying to repeat famous lines from a film or something like that, and you can just tell, like, this is not their forte, right? They're really good at being themselves. They're not really great at being someone else, and that's kind of what this feels like. The delivery is off because, well, we're missing that authentic Joanna side. And of course, it would be intentional. Maybe the point of this song is that by the end of it, she thinks that she's found this footing, right? I've mentioned that musically we've gotten away from the ascending and the descending and the vortex wild movement stuff, and we have something that feels a little stronger, like solid ground. Maybe she feels that she's landed somewhere, but between the stilted vocal delivery and the lack of vocal resolution in the melody to finish the track up, it's alluding to the fact that she's still not true to herself or something. I don't know. I'm still, there's so many elements to this music. And like I said, some of it I think is red herrings, and maybe this is as well. It's it's left me with a lot of conclusions that are based on gut feelings and not about uh, you know, anything that I feel very strongly to put my weight behind and say this is my reading of the track. This might be something it's alluding to, and a lot of that just comes from the fact that it's a very vague song to me. I find that so interesting. There's definitely songs that go over my head. I'm like, I don't get it. And there's songs that I listen to and I'm like, this is what it's about. This is exactly what I get out of it. This one, I understand everything that's going on. It's not going over my head, but I just can't connect with it, which is just such a wild experience to really appreciate the technical aspect of it, but not really understand what it's doing emotionally, but know what it's doing emotionally, if that makes any sense. There's a lot of really neat technical stuff in here going on. I kind of mentioned some of it, the counterpoint and stuff. There's some neat rhythmic ideas. There was one line I think I pointed out. It was, I don't. Oh, it was the harp and piano texture. When they were doubling up on that harmony, just sounded so good together. Um, there's just so many good individual moments, right? And that's what's cool about Joanna's work and what I've touched on in the past. I sound like a broken record now. Like I said, this is like our second or third reaction for her stuff. She finds a way to create linearity out of repetition. This song, I think, well, at least that line that we had at the very end, that was the third time we heard that. So that could have been a chorus. Um, but the words were not the same. I don't think. When we hit the lyrics, we'll see how that goes. Maybe it was just the final one. Like chorus 1 and 2 were the same, but 3 wasn't. Maybe it wasn't a chorus at all. Aside from that, though, the points between that were all very different. So I don't know if it was like A, B, C, B, D, B kind of idea. Um, but there were a lot of repeated ideas, like even within a section, and your foundational stuff is all repeated. What's on top isn't, and even in the foundational stuff, there's little bits of embellishment. There never is a point in the song where there is 100% a one-to-one perfect loop of an idea for an entirety of a section. There's always something about it that pushes forward, that changes, some sort of variation in the moment to moment. And I absolutely love that about her work. It makes it a bit more complex. It's difficult to pick out on a first listen. And that's kind of the charm about it. Like I said earlier, you might listen to something 10 times and still hear something new because you thought this was the same loop over and over and over. And you listen to it, oh, they tossed in a new little lick at the end there or in the middle. Um, and it's fascinating to listen to. I think she's the composer. If I remember correctly, it's been a while since we've had one of her songs. Yep, she wrote it. She's the composer. Yeah, her musical mind is just gorgeous. Every time she's on the channel, I'm looking forward to her instrumentation specifically. She's a fantastic vocalist, but I really love her composition more than her vocal work. And again, that's not to throw her not to throw shade at her vocals. She just has this wonderful mind for crafting a very modern sound out of traditional compositional techniques and walking that fine line. Like Lewis had said, modern neoclassical baroque pop. It is poppy, but it's also classical, and just walking that fine line of being accessible to a modern ear while still having a lot of what makes it, gives it that traditional baroque element. It's not just pop music with strings. All right, those are my thoughts. I'm sure there's a lot of awesome little details I missed, forgot about, maybe I didn't even hear on the first listen. If you want to tell me about that stuff, put it down in the comments. Let me know about your favorite moment of the track. I'm going to dig into some lyrics though, and then we're going to wrap this video up. Pretty typical. I think every time we get to Joanna's lyrics, I'm like, I don't know what's going on. There's a lot of metaphor in here. She's a very flowery lyricist. Lots of embellished lines, lots of stretched out, extended usage of language in ways that don't always make sense to me. Um, just a very colorful grasp of the English language. Um, but it seems to be about a person who she grew apart from. I don't know if this other person was literally a deep sea diver. This could be a metaphor for anybody who simply spent more time away from her than with her and became someone who didn't quite know who she was despite having been in a relationship with her for a very long time. We have some really beautiful lines in here. In fact, we start off with one of my favorites. A diver is my love who takes one breath above for every hour below the sea, just to show the distance between them. It is hinted at through much of this song that she is not a diver. She spends her entirety above water. The person that she loves spends a majority of their time beneath. Takes one breath above for every hour below. A breath takes mere seconds to do. The ratio of being away from our narrator is pretty high. There are multiple times in here when she is given things. Pearls. What is this? There's another one in here. Oh, a jewel worth twice her life. Um, she gets given these great things. Almost, it seems to me, as a way to bridge the gap between them. But what's interesting, especially, he says, this person, this diver, gave to me a jewel worth twice my life, but would cost me less than laying at low tide to see her true love phosphorescence. So she says that this jewel is pretty expensive. It's worth even more than me, which is, man, I don't want to read into that too much, but we'll just leave it. Anyways, but this jewel is nowhere near as expensive as what she would pay just to see her diver beneath the water. See him in his element. She has so much love for this other person, and yet they spend most of their time away from her. I think there is a chorus. We do have an extended stanza and then a shorter stanza that has similarities with the three other that come after it. One of them is our final bit. It says, "Why is the pain of birth lighter born than the pain of death? I ain't saying I loved you first, but I loved you best." So there's this imbalance already, and there's the element of the start of something and the end of something, and how the end of something hurts more than the start. I'm guessing that that's the relationship. The beginning of the relationship was fine, the end of it is very painful. And we talk about the division here. I loved you best. I loved you more than you loved me. That kind of thing. We kind of continue to explore this over the next two verses and choruses, because the choruses are different, and continue to look at how there is a rift between these two people and how she feels more strongly about him than he does her. Interestingly, by the end of it, she's not mad. She says, see how the infinite divides, which I'm going to guess is the space between. And the divers are not to blame for the rift spanning distant shores. You don't know my name, but I know yours. There's so much that he is not privy to her, which almost feels, I mean, it could mean a lot of things. It could be that he spends so much time away from her, she studies everything that he is. He is never off of her mind, even when they're apart. But the opposite is not true, and he doesn't really know who she is because he spends so much time away. But it could be that she has changed. In the time that he's been away, she is now a different person, a different woman. So much so that she might as well not even have the same name. And there are some lines between here that will support both readings of it, kind of. Like I said, it's very imaginative, poetic writing. And as I've mentioned many times in the past, that's not my forte. I'm getting better. But I do think that the relationship is over. And she doesn't blame the diver. She doesn't blame the other person for the space that came up between them. They were just engaging with their passions. It's just a matter of fact, you enjoyed the ocean more than having this relationship, and I see that now. That kind of vibe is what I get out of it. But it doesn't really explain the irresolution throughout here, and without me having a strong read on the emotional resonance of the music, I don't really know where her stance is on this. There were some very beautiful, optimistic lines throughout the song, but every time that happened, they never really resolved. They just became back to this neutral feeling. And maybe that's what the song is about. It's just a neutral recounting of a time when she was in love with someone who didn't quite love her back as much as she did, who didn't want the relationship as much as she did, and she doesn't blame the person. It's just a part of her past. Maybe that's what it's all about. I don't know. Those are my thoughts on Joanna Newsom's Divers, multiple. Yeah, you guys will have to help me out on that one. Let me know down in the comments if you have any thoughts on this, if you enjoyed it, anything that stood out to you, anything you'd like to add on to what I said, correct me on, or even just help me out. I had a lot of questions coming out of this one. Let me know that stuff in the comments section. Above that is a description box. In there is a link for Linktree. It'll take you to this menu right here, which has links for everything related to the channel. You can find my music, ways to support the channel, the Discord server, and so much more. Go ahead and check it out. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. Greatly appreciate all three. That wraps it up for today. We'll be back tomorrow, going to wrap up our first and last theme. We're going to check out our fourth band, something off of their first album and something off of their last. All right, until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening whenever you choose to watch my videos.